I found myself out of alignment with who I was at my core in an effort to succeed in that particular environment. I found myself feeling very overlooked and putting up with things that I didn't have to. And I always say, my love language is helping others discover their own power. So yeah, I was in that spot. I can help others get out of that.
What would be the thing that you would tell the woman listening to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing?
When they are in a situation, I want them to be interested in the outcome. And what I want them to stop doing, and then I'll explain both, is I want them to stop being attached.
My mission is to embolden every woman in the C-suite or on the rise to claim her agency and challenge the norms holding her back. This show offers candid conversations with powerful business leaders sharing their real stories of success and failure. Join us right now. Hello, this is your host, Dr. Cynthia. I'm so happy to be back with you with this episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. Today, I have a very special guest and a dear friend, Nina Blackshear. Nina is a certified executive and leadership coach, a TEDx speaker, I'm very jealous, an attorney who is passionate about helping individuals to realize their full potential. While her practice is inclusive and open to all, Nina focuses particularly on offering a safe space for successful women, you listening, to overcome limiting beliefs, lead with confidence, and level up to what's next. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, ignored, overlooked, marginalized, undervalued, underrecognized, or othered, I think we can all probably raise our hand at least once. As you pursue your career goals, Nina gets it. In fact, she used to be her own ideal client, which we're going to jump into that just a bit. She provides executive and leadership coaching, as I mentioned, to senior level and C-suite executives across all industries, and is regularly sought after to speak on an array of topics for workshops, offsite retreats, webinars, podcasts, and conferences. And I had the great privilege and pleasure of meeting Nina during our executive coaching certification program. We became fast friends. We'd never actually met in person, which just is so funny to me because I feel like you're my bestie. So welcome, Nina. So happy to have you today.
Thank you. I am so pleased to be here and be part of this. I'm so excited for this conversation.
I want to start with something that was in your bio, which really struck me when you said you used to be your ideal client. Take us through a little bit of your journey, because imposter syndrome is something that you know very well. A lot of us do, but this comes from your lived experience.
So I am, in addition to all the things that are in my bio, I'm also a lawyer, right? And I went to law school after undergrad because I had no idea what else to do. I did not have a job. I did not have the kind of major that was going to get me a job. And I was like, I guess I'll go to law school. Everybody always said I'd be a great lawyer. And then halfway through law school, I was like, oh yeah, no, this isn't for me. I don't want to do this. Obviously, I've sort of come full circle, but I've gone through so many different disciplines, right? Like HR, marketing, communications, fundraising. I've done so many different kinds of jobs. But I found myself in one of those roles in an organization that was prided itself on being very high performing. But there was a lot of pressure to compete, to get ahead, a lot of zero-sum thinking. And a lot of people who looked exactly the same were kind of getting the big opportunities, right? And I found myself in this sort of what I call a constant striving posture, where I just felt like I got to make it happen. I got to get ahead. And I got to do it here, right? You get these blinders on where you feel like I got to make it happen here. And so I found myself out of alignment with who I was at my core in an effort to succeed in that particular environment. I found myself feeling very overlooked and putting up with things that I didn't have to, right? And so it is my honor and pleasure and mission, quite frankly, to help women who find themselves in that kind of situation to take off the blinders, right? And to see that there are other opportunities out there and just how much they have inside to give. And I always say, my love language is helping others discover their own power. So yeah, I was in that spot. I can help others get out of that spot. How about that?
Well, they say that we're best poised to serve the person we once were, right? So, I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
so true of your story, and just an endorsement of you. That was one of the ways we connected. I was in a corporate position and going through things, and so often as we were coaching one another in our peer coaching, you really were able to lean in and sort of meet me where I was in those moments of, I don't know that this aligns anymore. I'm not sure that this is the place I'm supposed to be. Um, but that was my plan. My plan was to be there. My plan was to stay there. I had an exit strategy, which wasn't intended to be anytime soon. And so you really do have this an amazing ability to sort of get underneath and make feeling out of alignment okay, but not stay there.
And first of all, thank you for those kind words. And obviously, we helped each other through we've helped each other through many situations and sticky points. So the compliment absolutely flows both ways. But I do think that giving people a safe space and the permission to even admit this might not be where I want to be. This might not be what I want to do. I might, even if I'm in the right place or the right company, maybe I don't want that top job, right? I coach a lot of lawyers, and especially in-house, who everybody thinks they're supposed to want to be the general counsel. Well, newsflash, there's only one general counsel role at every company, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That does become a very zero-sum game, but there's a lot of places that you can be very happy. You can make good money. You can make a contribution. You can maybe retain a different kind of work-life balance than when you're at the very, very tippy top, and you'll be perfectly happy, right? So just giving people the permission to not be always aiming for the moon in every possible opportunity, because they think to not do that makes them look lazy or like that they lack ambition, is really powerful. And just to have people be able to say those words out loud and see that realization, like the world didn't come crashing down or come to an end because you admitted maybe you want something new.
Yeah. And a purpose is bigger than just the job that you're in, right? Maybe you don't want the top job because your bigger purpose is you have a different moon you're shooting for. Maybe it has to do with your family, or maybe it has to do with a passion project or nonprofit work or things that you really want to give back in other ways. And it isn't the top job. For a lot of those listening, that woman that's listening that says, "But I really want that. I want to aspire to be in the C-suite, but I never feel like I'm enough, or I worry that I don't have all that it takes." You and I have had a lot of conversations about imposter syndrome, and for those listening and not watching, I put that in the hypothetical quotes, the air quotes, because it's been getting a lot of interesting backlash lately. I don't know. As I've been following LinkedIn, as I've been watching different places on social, there's people that have pretty strong feelings about this notion of imposter syndrome. What is your take on all of that?
I think it's a nuanced conversation. I know that some of what I've seen recently, and there's a very sort of high profile Harvard Business Review article around, stop telling women they have imposter syndrome, right? And the basis of that article, if you really get into it, is stop telling women that feeling like imposters is their fault, right? Or that the circumstances in which they find themselves is at their fault or all of theirs to change. I actually heartily agree with that, right? But what I don't agree with is sort of that short tagline, stop telling women they have imposter syndrome, because women have imposter syndrome, right? And so by taking away that vocabulary and not being able to call the thing, what it does, and what imposter syndrome already does to people all by itself, is it's very isolating. Right? It's one of those things where you feel like I'm the imposter, but everybody else has it figured out. So you feel very alone. And so then to further go and say, well, we're not even going to call it we finally found a name for that pit in your stomach feeling of being a fraud and always on the verge of being found out. We're going to take that terminology and vocabulary away from you. I don't think it's helpful. I think that the idea, the term, the concept of imposter syndrome can create community where people start to share, they start to open up, they start to be vulnerable. A, it makes them feel safer, and B, it makes them feel not so alone because other people say, oh yeah, me too, me too. And most importantly, the people that you have maybe put on a pedestal because they're a little bit further up the org chart, or you see them killing it on LinkedIn, or they've done a TEDx talk, I don't know. They, they say, me too. And you see, imposter syndrome knows no levels, it knows no race, it knows no boundaries. I do think that it hits women more intensely, and that is partially because women are minimized, marginalized, and othered, right? And that's not our fault. That's not our fault. But there are other pieces of it that I think we can control, right? So, or we can influence around the imposter syndrome.
Well, and that's one of the things I love about how you think about this, is that you challenge the idea that it is completely out of our control. You know, that was so important in Now Near Next, which you are a contributor to my first book around this very topic, which is this notion of we can agree that there's societal norms, there's cultural situations, there's individuals that create environments that definitely perpetuate some of these feelings, that we can name it and normalize it in terms of it is a feeling and we can call it something. But it isn't entirely outside of our ability to control or overcome in some capacity. So when you're working with women who, the woman listening that says, boy, you just described what I feel on a daily, what advice do you have in terms of that individual taking back some control?
You know, there's the sort of from the world of Marvel, I guess, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Thing is, it works the other way, right? With great responsibility comes great power. There's externally imposed imposter syndrome, right? That's the situation in which you find yourself, right? And they're making you feel like you don't belong. They're making you feel like you don't know your stuff. They're making you doubt yourself, you know, small microaggressions, things like that. But then there's the internally imposed imposter syndrome. And for me, you know, my theory is when we act certain ways that are out of alignment with our core values, right? We say, we laugh at jokes we don't really think are funny in the workplace. We, you know, participate in activities we don't really want to. You know, we just put up with behavior that we wouldn't in the pursuit of getting ahead or building our career, or this is how it's done, or conforming to a culture that really doesn't align with who we are at our core. We get really out of alignment with ourselves. And that is when you don't just feel like an imposter, you are an imposter. You're not being true to who you are. And so you are perpetuating that feeling of showing up as a fraud. You are creating some part of that feeling of I'm about to be found out, because you're sort of living this double life. And it happens, it's death by paper cuts. It happens in very, very small steps. We make these really small concessions, but you just get further and further away from who you are. And now these things, there's this sort of cognitive dissonance about who you really want to be at your core and how you're showing up. And I'm not talking about code switching, right? I mean, everybody code switches to some extent when they go into a workplace, right? People talk about bringing their whole selves to work, or their authentic selves to work. You still have to use some judgment around that, right? We code switch every time we walk into a library, right? You lower your voice. You don't just say, well, I speak with a loud voice,
so
I'm going to be who I am in this library, right? We all do it somewhere, right. But it reaches an inflection point where it's just too much and we're not being true to who we are. So I guess what I'm saying is, even though you have to take accountability and you really have to look inward and say, where have I made those concessions? Where am I not really living in harmony with my own values? You know, with how I want to present what I really think the essence of my character is. Once you're brave enough to face that and acknowledge where you've come out of alignment, you can start to fix that, right? So you've taken responsibility and now you have power to fix that part. So to me, that's taking some of it back. Yes, it's maybe a hard pill to swallow that you're not living your truest life. But once you get past that and you start to fix it, it is, I find it to be very empowering for women to take that piece of it back when they may not have as much influence over their environment.
There's so much that's so powerful in what you just said. And so I want to say it back because and just to ensure clarity, and I appreciate the contrast with code switching because, hopefully people aren't walking into an environment using massive profanity if that's what they normally do in their private space, right? The library is a perfect example as well. But, most of us take on a bit of a more professional tone when we are in a professional setting than maybe if we were having, a glass of wine or with our girlfriends. Perhaps the conversation is a bit different. But this idea that if you are pretending to be something that is not part of your core value system, how you normally would see the world to fit in. And I love the example. I think the most powerful example is when you said, if somebody's doing off-color jokes or things of that nature, you're the only woman and it's all men, and they make a few little inappropriate, not little inappropriate, but make a few inappropriate sexually oriented comments.
Mm-hmm.
To fit in, you just laugh it off and act like it's no big deal. You are showing up as an imposter. You are not being true to yourself. And that's a small example. But this idea of, does it start with having such clarity around your own purpose and your own values? I mean, to me, it seems like it starts with being crystal clear on, what do I stand for? What is my purpose? What are my values? What are my non-negotiables, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once you have clarity around that, to your point, then you can make choice.
I think that that's absolutely correct. I mean, the self-awareness is a huge pillar. I talk a lot about imposter syndrome, but I speak a lot about authentic leadership. And for me, that self-awareness piece is huge, right? Because there's no way that you're showing up authentically if, to your point, you haven't given some proactive thought to who you are, what you believe, what you stand for, what you absolutely will not stand for, right? So that becomes part of your non-negotiables as well. And, it's interesting, I know it's a primarily probably a woman-based audience who's listening to your podcast, but I think these days women are overwhelmingly, I think, less likely to hear an off-color, let's say, woman, gender, sexual tinged joke. It depends on your workplace. Some places that's still very much tolerated. But what you might hear is a joke that they assume you're going to be okay with because they don't see you reflecting that dimension of diversity. Right. And so you've got to be also clear, not just about, okay, the thing that makes me a woman. Obviously, if somebody made some, joke about women's butt, I'm not okay with that. I'm going in, fangs bared and claws out. But if somebody made an off-color joke about Black people in front of you as a white woman and assuming it's kind of this safe space, what's your non-negotiable there, right? And only only you can define what that is. But I think if people again are saying things around you that they assume will fly because you're not part of the group that they are othering or denigrating, and you chuckle along or you don't say anything, that still contributes to you starting to feel out of alignment with yourself if that is something that offends you at your core. So you really have to think this through.
Yeah, it really takes imposter syndrome to an entirely different level and dimension. Because where we've gone is not only showing up and feeling like they're going to figure out that I haven't done this long enough, or I don't know enough, or they're going to assume that because I had a different, college experience, university experience, etc., that somehow they're going to figure out that I don't have it all together. To this notion of, I'm doubting my own authenticity because I'm in an environment where I'm out of alignment with who I am at my core. That's a lot. That's powerful. But I mean, it feels to me that it starts with the N word of really being so clear on that first part of who am I? To your point, it's hard to know how to be your authentic self if you're not clear on your core values and your non-negotiables, right? So you can show up in a way, and then how does the person listening that is the only woman on a male team, or the youngest, right? I've been there, the youngest person among a group in a meeting, in a situation where I'm just feeling conflicted about. I know that all of these middle-aged men have more experience, more time in the saddle than I do. Am I going to be enough? What's your advice for that individual?
I mean, and I would point out, you don't actually have to be the youngest in the room, right? Like to feel like that. People who are very seasoned and they know on paper and they know in their mind that they've got it, right? But certainly, right, if you're newer to a situation and you're feeling a little bit hesitant, right, about kind of stepping in, first of all, if you've been, we're talking about it in a career sort of context, right? If you've been hired into a role, they saw that you either had the requisite skills or that you have the potential to get there, right? That you demonstrated that already. Yeah, I think you have to hold on to little bits of evidence because the emotions rage, right? They send you into the anxiety spiral, right? And all you can do is cling to these little bits of facts and figures. So go data, try to lift out of the emotion, try to strip the emotion out of it. What is the data? They hired me. They saw that I had the right things on my resume, or they saw that I had the potential based on the answers I was giving in my interviews, whatever it was, right? And then the emotions come back and they say, oh yeah, but you obviously hoodwinked them, and because you're such a fraud and all you're good at is lying. So they'll eventually figure out that you were. And listen, every job that I've had, I've not lied my way into, but I've had to do a little sizzle, shake, and bake to get it.
Right.
You do a bunch of Googling for 48 hours over the weekend so that you've got a little bit of the lingo. You're studying the website and you're looking at the mission and you're writing all that down, right? You're cramming, right? Because you're doing 6 different interview processes at a time. There's no way that you're going to know, like a full consultant who's had 3 months to study the books, a company from A to Z. You did enough to say, look, I've got aptitude. I learn quickly. I can process large amounts of information in a short amount of time. I'm going to hit the ground running. The learning curve won't be so steep for me. That's okay. You have to embrace that, like that you're not going to immediately go from A to Z and have, complete mastery on your first day. So I think it's embracing being uncomfortable. It's looking at data, right? Not just how you got into this particular role. How have you been successful in the past? How has it worked out? Can you think of one other time where you felt this? And if you suffer from imposter syndrome, trust me, you'll have plenty of examples of times when you felt like this before, right? Like it won't take long. You want it to reach back that far. How did it end up? How did the situation resolve? And look, even if there was a time when you're like, actually, it went terrible. I fell on my face, or, I didn't know, and I was out of my depth so fast, right? A, I bet that's 1 out of every 10 times. And B, if that's the case, then what did you learn? You learned that maybe that particular area or situation, or that if that kind of scenario arose again, maybe that's a stretch too far. But the other 9, no problem. You got there. You got over the hump. So I would encourage people to try to step away from the emotion for a moment. Talk to people you trust who can be your cheerleaders, right? Ask them, what do you think I'm good at? Right? Ask them, get some positive reinforcement, and don't poo-poo it. And I would also say, even though I think a coach can help with a lot of this, right? Help you to kind of develop these skills, practice these skills, experiment and see that they work. I think for some people, and I have found this in my coaching practice, that insecurity and that feeling of not being enough is tied to a lot of things in maybe their past, their upbringing, familial, cultural, sometimes religiously, right? Like it depends on how you came up and what was messaged to you from a young age. For some people, I would encourage you, if it's really, really deep seated and you're having a really hard time letting go of it, maybe like therapy is something you might want to look into to kind of unpack some of those feelings, because that will make in tandem. We know that coaching and therapy aren't the same thing, right? Makes coaching so much more powerful if you maybe are doing those things concurrently, or sometimes you need to do the therapy first and then the coaching, because then you really can look forward with a clearer eye and you can stop telling yourself these stories.
Is a really critical point. And I don't want to overshadow that, this notion that depending on the degree, I coach men who have imposter syndrome in different situations, right? I work with a lot of legacy companies, family companies that are passing down generation to generation. And, if you're the person that's going to be assuming the reins that your great grandfather, grandfather, father, or mother had, and now it's you, that notion of, um, are people going to think I'm only chosen because I have the last name, right? I won the genetic lottery. And part of that is true. You are in the line of succession for that reason. However, you can still be credible and bring great things and leave your own footprint and all of those things. So, but the point I wanted to just loop back to is it is for some necessary to move in a more clinical therapeutic direction. That, those formative experiences around being enough, and being capable and being seen and so on can be deeply, deeply rooted. And as you and I both know as coaches, we don't cross the line of getting into the clinical therapy side of things. Sometimes that comes up in our coaching sessions where we come to realize that it's so much deeper that the person would really benefit. And I'm a big fan of seeking that kind of therapy. And sometimes, to your point, it has to precede the coaching. I love this idea of embracing the feeling. So naming it, creating awareness around it. And what you walked through is sometimes what I will offer to my clients is create your highlight reel. So in those moments, right, what you described is think about times when you felt this way, that it came out very positively, and start to put those thoughts in your mind, because it creates this psychological momentum. It creates this notion of energy that is positive facing when you think about, yeah, I've been here before and it did turn out well. And maybe those that didn't, those aren't the ones you add in the highlight reel, right? Use the good ones. And to your point, we kind of never get past it. At this stage of my life, I've taken on clients in the last year or so that early on had my own sense of imposter syndrome, felt a little bit, was I over my skis? Is it very affluent individuals that, live a very different lifestyle than I grew up with, et cetera. Even had a client at one point describe me, not to my face, but as, what would a girl from the Ozarks know about this?
Ugh.
Right? With all respect to those that are from the Ozarks, it was sort of, this minimizing, whether it be the university you graduated from or where you grew up or where you're living, et cetera. We all can be subject to those feelings in a variety of situations. I want to switch gears because I have great envy about the fact that you recently did a TED Talk, and I'm so excited for you, and you are such a rock star.
Thank you.
Entitled, Could This Be Your Year of No? I am obsessed with the title because I talk a lot about boundaries. And one of the things why I talk about with regard to boundaries is no is a complete sentence, right? That no is a complete sentence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That you pursue this idea of subtraction rather than addition, or subtracting rather than adding. And give us the insight on your TED Talk.
Every TEDx event has a theme, right? And this one was piece by piece, and how small pieces add up to big impact, right? And as I was thinking through my submission, I thought, well, what if I flip this? I think most people think about adding piece by piece. Well, what if we subtract piece by piece? So that's where sort of the talk came from. I agree with you that no is a complete sentence. I am not a person who has a hard time saying no. But what I've realized in talking to people, and especially with a lot of my clients, is that's not everybody's story, right? The people pleasing thing is big out there, and people have a hard time. But here's the thing. If you're saying yes all the time, and that makes you happy, and you're living a full life that brings you joy, and at the end of the day, you're exhausted, but your eyes are sparkling, and you're ready to get up and do it all again the next day, go for it. Say yes. Say yes all you like, right? I'm not telling you that yes is the wrong answer. What I'm saying is, if you're saying yes all the time and you don't feel like that, right? You feel burnt out. You feel over volunteered and overextended and overcommitted, and it's not bringing you joy. then I would say maybe you need to consider what you can subtract in order to, the whole idea of the talk is how do you curate the life that you truly want? And what does that look like? And again, we kind of keep coming back to these same themes of self-awareness, introspection, right? Turning inward. You can't aim for the life you truly want unless you've really thought through what is the life I truly want. And also, just like we talked about before, you have to give yourself permission to say what it is or write down what it is if you can't say it out loud quite yet, right? Or just say it to yourself if you feel like maybe the people around you are going to judge you for wanting something a little different than how it looks right now, right? And that could really run the gamut, right? It's not just in your career. My talk was about sort of how do you live your life in general. So it's relationships, it's financial situation, right? I mean, a lot of people do a lot of things to keep up with the Joneses financially and would be happy with so much less, but feel very responsible to sort of keep that going, right? And so they do a lot of things that do not make them happy. So that's sort of the crux of the talk. But I also in the talk, and I do hope people go and watch it. It's only like 11 minutes, so you'll get through it in a second. But you said, no is a complete sentence. Again, I agree with that. I realize that that's a big jump for people who are in a constant yesing, people pleasing place, right? They need tools. They need actual language and approaches to figure out when do you say yes, when do you say no, and literally how do I say it in a way that if I'm not comfortable just saying no and that being, and putting a period at the end of that, what words can I use where I am saying no. I'm not saying, oh, maybe later, kicking the can, right? I am saying a full no, but it's in a way that feels better to me somehow. So I do give a couple of approaches to help sort of bridge people.
I have a couple of examples. There's a woman who I have great admiration for. She has a couple quotes in Now Near Next. And I had asked her at one point, I was serving on a volunteer committee for a nonprofit, and they were looking for somebody to chair the next year's event. It really isn't a lot of work. It's more having sort of the name and the influence in the city. And I said, this woman would be amazing. I'll be happy to reach out to her. I have a relationship. I got the nicest no I've the nicest no ever. She wrote me and she said, I am so honored that you would think of me. And that's such an important organization. I'm currently doing X, Y, and Z, and I just would not have the time to give the the energy to the level of importance that this is. But thank you for thinking of me. And I'm like, well, that is the nicest turnoff I've ever received. But I think that gets to your point, right? I agree with you, and I teach around boundaries. And when I speak to the no itself, it's like find a way that you can do it that feels authentic to you, especially if everything in your body wants to say yes because you want to put a smile on somebody else's face, right? But it's not a good use of your time. And I'll give a nod to one of my favorite podcasts. Don't judge me. It's hysterical. Is Smartless, and with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes.
Oh, I love that podcast. So good, so good.
I don't remember which one of them said this, but I've used this advice in my own keynotes. Is that thing that somebody asks you to do, to help with, to do for them, etc. And it's like a month away. And you're like, oh yeah, sure, I'll be happy to help you with that. And then the day before the said thing happened, you're like, oh, why did I agree to that? Like, I'd rather eat shards of glass than have to go do this thing, right? And so the advice was this. When somebody makes an ask, imagine it's tomorrow. And if you get that same feeling, that's when you find your best path to no, right? Don't agree to it because it seems so far in the future. Imagine it's tomorrow. I think that's such sage advice.
That's amazing. That's a fantastic trick, and I'm going to incorporate that into my coaching practice now too.
Absolutely.
But I just wanted to add to the woman who kind of gave the masterclass in terms of how she responded to the request. I want to point out she didn't try to, this is what a lot of people do. They might put that together. They might get themselves together to say no in that way. And then at the very last minute, right at the end zone, they fumble because they say, reach out to me next year. They try to soften it, right? With not now, but maybe later. And next year, and look, if you really think next year you'd be thrilled to do it, it's just this year you've got these competing priorities, cool. But if you're just trying to say no because you're pretty sure you don't want to do it next year and you're not going to want to do it the year after that, don't resist the urge to soften, right? That was a soft enough no. It's lovely. And honestly, she could have just said, not for me. Thanks so much. Bye. Right? It was a little bit more than that, a little more flowery than that. That's lovely. You don't have to soften with the maybe. When you inject a time frame of maybe some other time, it's just going to come up for you. Again, you'll find yourself right back in the same position.
Oh my goodness. Nina, you and I could talk for ages because these are topics that we both have so much passion around. As we're kind of coming to a wrap and we think about all the things we're pulling together here, what would be the thing that you would tell the woman listening to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing?
So the thing I'm going to say, the start and stop are actually related, right? The thing that I want women to start doing is when they are in a situation, I want them to be interested in the outcome. And what I want them to stop doing, and then I'll explain both, is I want them to stop being attached to the outcome.
Say more. I love this.
So when you're in a situation, let's say you're really excited about getting a promotion or, pursuing a new role, whatever it is. We end up kind of like, think of it like a roller coaster, right? You can strap yourself into that roller coaster, right? Because these things rarely go in a straight line and smoothly, right? You can strap yourself into the roller coaster and you can ride every high and low of that process. Or you can put yourself in the blimp. Blimp is like an old word. Maybe I should say drone now because I feel like I'm dating myself. They're like, what, a dirigible, Nina? Like, okay.
I know what a blimp is.
But I know we are ladies of a certain age. But you put yourself in the blimp or the drone for the young folks, and you can watch that roller coaster do its same loopity loops, but you can cruise like this above it. Calm, still seeing everything, very interested in what the roller coaster is doing, but not strapped in, gasping for breath, adrenaline spiking and going down, cortisol causing you to, gain 20 pounds. You are not necessarily strapping yourself to it. So I think that women, we tend to be so emotionally tied to what's going on, like in our careers, in our lives, certainly, but in our careers, right? You can care about what you do and you can care about making an impact and you can be ambitious and care about, getting the next role if that's really, truly important to you. Again, we're looking inward. Is it truly important to you, right? But we don't have to emotionally strap ourselves to every up and down and peak and valley of that, right? It's exhausting. So you'll be better situated to deal with the highs and the lows, right? The triumphs and the disappointments, if you're able to keep yourself in that blimp or drone and calmly, observe just a little bit removed. So that's what I would say my stop and start would be for women. And then for continue, it's just sort of the same theme we've been talking about. This, I think that's the through line here, right? Is that continue that journey of self-exploration, of self-awareness, right? Don't ever stop because it will change. You may figure out in your 20s what's really important to you. That could be very different at 45, and that could be extraordinarily different at 65, right? And I do hope that women of all ages and walks of life are tuning into this amazing podcast to hear, your sage words and then, these funky time guests that you have on like me. But, that's an ongoing lifelong process. And you owe it to yourself. It's one of the highest forms of self-care is to be in touch with what you truly want so that you can then operate from that place of truth.
That is such sage advice. And I'm thinking back on my own career and thinking about the times that I was strapped to the roller coaster. And I think the reality is it's so easy once you're strapped in, it's so hard to get off. And just to have those occasional timeouts, calling an occasional timeout for yourself to say, Am I on the drone or am I on the roller coaster? And how do I pull the line or however and stop this thing so I can get off, right? Pull the emergency brake and get off this crazy train that I'm on. This has been an absolute pleasure and joy. Let everybody know where they can get a hold of you.
Yeah. They can go to my website, www.ninablackshear.com. And I've got resources there, a blueprint to help you through tough talks and difficult conversations, a method to help you, go for that next role that looks a little bit imposing in the job description, but maybe figure out how you can align your experience and have the courage to go for it. So I'd love to, continue the conversation there. They can also follow me on LinkedIn. Currently, there are only 2 Nina Blackshears on LinkedIn, so you will find me. And then I'm on Instagram at Nina Blackshear Coaching.
Thank you again. That wraps up today's episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. Thank you for investing this time in yourself and sharing a little bit of your very precious time with me and our guests today. If you found that this message resonated with you, I invite you to rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with someone that you care about that needs to hear these important messages. Let's stay in touch. You can reach me at cynthiabentzen-mercer.com, or you can also email me for more information at hello@cynthiabentzen-mercer.com, and all the socials at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer. Until next time, remember to boldly start working on your future today. Take care. That concludes today's episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'd be so grateful if you'd rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Visit CynthiaBenzenMercer.com and find me on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer.